big names, big brands that are being breached in some way or another. Even in the last year, we look at CIA, Twitter, Cathay Pacific, Toll Transport here in Australia, Travelex, and Microsoft. So, here are some, Hershey Chocolate is another one, huge names that have been breached. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot for us to take from all of those, but let's have a look at the people issues too. As you say, to me, that's one of the most important things, and something that we can really not easily, but something that we can do something about.
Yeah, so when we talk about PayPal, I think PayPal has built, so previously that, as far as I know, the PayPal has built this DMARC protocol. They are a very big, I'll say, contributor to this particular protocol, where PayPal, Microsoft, and there are a couple of companies which come together and build this DMARC to protect their people or also their customers by giving an email authentication protocol. So that's something that has been, I think you correctly mentioned, that the PayPal hacks are also getting increased. But when we talk about this, there are BEC, which is business email compromise. And there is a new concept called VEC, which is vendor email compromised. So there are two different concepts which coming in, especially from a phishing standpoint. What's your take on that? And what are the best way for the people to make sure that they do not fall into those traps which is happening around the world?
And of course, add to that to phishing, which is voicemail type phishing. There are a whole range of these new, and essentially they're social engineering scams that are just becoming more sophisticated. They're also looking more realistic as well. There are very definitely some good products out there that you can use to ensure that you're looking for what I call risky click behavior. People in the organisation who click on links, even though we enshrine it in policy that they may not, and that we tell them over and over again, you may not do this. But somebody will always fall for it because it looks good. Some of these look realistic, so they do. So you have to have some way of measuring what's going on, some way of having them also able to report it. So in Outlook, if you've got the phishing button, if they think it looks a bit dodgy, then they can actually click on that link or click on that button. That's really important. The other thing is the education piece behind that. You have to keep educating people. You can't educate them at induction and then forget about it. This has to be ongoing in nature, right? And I think that's where a lot of organisations fall short, is they don't continually educate people, don't make their staff aware of the latest trends in some of these instances. And also, our very senior people in organisations are also very much at risk, and then we have potential brand fraud. And so it goes on. So we have to educate, I believe, from the top of the tree all the way down to the person who's, perhaps least involved in technology, but still needs to be educated.
Yeah. So I think you correctly mentioned about the security awareness practices that has to be followed in the organizations. And that button that you're talking about, specifically when you will be able to understand that how many people or the kind of email are being reported. I've seen, so there's, just for our audience, I just wanted to put some facts, more facts, like what we have seen in the industry is it takes around, like Joe mentioned, that when you report an email without a proper incident response mechanism, it takes around 121 days to investigate that email. So that's a huge thing. Like in security, if you give us a 5 minutes to anyone, they can catch out the important data from your organization. So that's a very, very valid point. I think people should look around to install these mechanisms, or they have, like Joe mentioned, a lot of tools which you can utilize. Some of them I know, I can just mention them over here. Could be, so we have in Kratikal, we have a tab which is threat button, where if you click on that button, the entire email is being investigated in a real time, and you get a score. And there's tons of parameters by which you can identify, the user can identify if it's a threat email or not. Or you can go for a know before, Cofines, the PhishMe, previously known as Cofines. There's some iron scale. So there are a lot of other organizations as well who are working in this particular area to make
I
sure
mean,
that
Mimecast,
Mimecast,
the list goes on. There's a lot
yes,
of people in that space.
yes.
But, you know, I think the important part about that is to also not just rely on a single tool either. You know, I am very lucky that we have a very strong tool set, comprehensive. And I think, you know, that's the other secret is one basket. You know, don't be a totally mime cast or totally co-fence. You know, you need to actually have a bit of a mix and match to make sure that you know, things don't fall through, and that you don't also become complacent as well.
Yeah, that's I think great insight for the people who are from a security background. So do not depend on a single vendor. Have a mix of those vendors, so you can get a gateway from somewhere else, you can get a incident response from somewhere else, or a security awareness. And the beauty with today's products, I think, Joe can comment on that as well, that these are interconnected. So they have a very good, beautiful APIs where you can connect each and every product with each other, and that's how the things works.
And that's a really good point to have. If you're choosing products, you need to have good reporting to come out of these products too.
Yeah.
I report regularly to the Audit and Risk Committee, for instance, so I need to have that sort of reporting at hand that I can speak to where we are and in fact graphically represent it for them as well. So to do that, I need to make sure my tools have those APIs that will allow me that combined consolidated reporting.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for pointing out that. So as a renowned cybersecurity expert, I've seen that you work with multiple companies as a security expert. What are the measures do you think the organization should take to protect its employees from cyber threats? So I just wanted to get from your own experience, what are the measures that you think that, because like you said, the employees are somewhere is most, I'd say, capable assets as well as the weakest link in the organization. So what's your thought on this?
They are the weakest link. You're absolutely right. But what we have to, and in fact, Kevin Mitnick said to me once that we are the wetware, the flesh and the blood, and the wetware is always the weakest link. So what do? We actually have to make the weakest link into human firewalls, right? So how do we do that? We have to make them conscious of their actions. We need to enshrine the notion of security into the day-to-day practices of the organisation through policy, through education, through protocol, through taking a security-first approach. You know, and sometimes that's difficult in organisations where technology is not core to their business. You know, so you actually have to bring them on the journey with you to understand and to get buy-in from across the business, from all areas of business, to ensure that they understand the impact of not having good security in place, you know, and the potential damage to an organisation, not just financially, but indeed its brand and the reputation of the senior people in the organisation. So to me, I guess, to go back to the question, is education, 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 communication, communication, communication. 6 most important words, I think, in a Chief Information Security Officer's lexicon.
Okay, so like I said, we also work in a security awareness space. So we have a product called ThreatCop which has hundreds of modules from a security awareness standpoint. And what we do is we customize security awareness training corresponding to that particular person. So for example, let's say we have simulated a phishing attacks, and if the guy clicks on that attack, there's a automated training which goes to them. It's not a predefined training. Sometimes it's a predefined training. It totally depends on the user. Sometimes it's a personalized training. So let's say what kind of email that you've seen, the kind of landing page that you have, and the kind of data they submitted. So there's an entire landing page which is created. How do you see a role of personalized training for the people? And the biggest part, and this is what I've seen so far from industry, for the people, that how do you make sure that the people are getting engaged on those trainings? There are a lot of trainings which goes on. There are a lot of content which is available. What's your thought? So you have been, like I mentioned earlier, you have been in this industry for a very, very long time, and it's great to see women especially doing that well in this industry. So what's your thought on on giving them an awareness training and making sure that they are actually reading that stuff. That the important part is being a CISO. I think you must have been facing these issues that you put up provide a training, but the people are not completing it, or you have to go behind them to complete it. So what's your thought? I'm just throwing out some lights from my own experience, and you can put it on some more lights as well.
Well, it's pretty simple. You have to tie it to some sort of key performance indicator, right? You have to, there has to be the what's in it for the person who's doing the training. No point in just telling them you've got to do it. That's like saying you've got to eat something that you really dislike. So it's not, which for me would be carrots. It's like she's got to eat a ton of carrots. Well, I'm not going to do it, am I? So it has to be made palatable for me. It has to be made something that I actually want to do. So what am I going to get out of this? So you can look at various ways of as I say, you link training to, or you link the outcome of that training to performance indicators in some way. You can also make it so as this training is palatable. Offer multiple modalities type training. I might like a gamified sort of training environment, but you, Pavan, might want something quite different. You might want old-fashioned quiz style, a test. Somebody else might want to see an animation. So you need to have different types of training available to people, and you can do them in just short segments. So they do short segments often. That way it's not an impost, because the thing that we hear all the time is, it's going to take too much time. It's going to take too much time. Well, the thing is that you need to make sure that people understand they need to set the time aside to do it, because of the risk to the organisation if they don't do it. And indeed, perhaps it's linked to a bonus, and so they won't have that incentive, that financial incentive. I know that one client that I worked with some years ago, it was a banking organisation, so this makes sense, right? They used to run these continual quizzes, security awareness quizzes. And I think it was at the end of every quarter, if you had put, you'd done the crossword, you'd done the quizzes, you'd done all of that, and you put your results in, and you'd gotten 100%, you could put that into a contest, and they would draw out the winner, and it was $5,000 Australian dollars on a credit card. It was a bank, so they could do that. Me, it's movie tickets or chocolate, but but you can do something that actually makes it attractive for people to be involved with doing training.
Yeah, so that's something interesting. The people tied them either with the KPIs or some financial, I'll say, model or some reward system, which will help them to motivate more to learn those trainings. So I'm just asking from experience. I will not ask to name anything, but have you seen what kind of phishing attack that you've majorly seen? I know you mentioned PayPal one in the previous section, but from your own experience, and what are the first step you see when someone reports a phishing attacks in the organization that you work for, or what's your approach basically?
If somebody it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter whether it's phishing or it's some other sort of scam. It's about always making sure that the CISO's door is open, right? So you actually listen to these people. One of the issues that I face with one of my clients, I work very closely with the privacy officer, because they're in a field of practice where personally identifiable information is a big deal for them. So it's security and privacy working hand in hand. So I work with them. And so one of the things that we do is we make sure that we are approachable. So if somebody thinks they've got an issue, they can either go to the privacy officer or they come to me, and we talk about it, and we explain to them where they may have gone wrong or what they can do to rectify the situation, and what we're going to do from this point on. At no point are we threatening. At no point are they going to lose their job, unless they've done it on purpose, of course. That's a different thing. That becomes an investigation. But generally, we try and make it so people will report these things to us. Because if you take that, if your door's always closed, or you take a very I guess, aggressive approach, people are not going to come to you with these things. So you end up with phishing going wild, or scams running wild throughout the organisation, and perhaps credentials being compromised as a result. So my practice is to be open and honest and get people to feel that they can report. That's part of that security first approach as well, making yourself approachable to other people.
Great. I think that's a better insight, and there are a lot of people who again are from information security background who are watching this. So make yourself approachable. You should not be kind of busy that you are not able to listen to your people. So make sure that the people should be able to reach out to you on time, because the more time it will go on, the major advantage the hacker will have on this side.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? If you don't get onto this stuff quickly, the bad guys can really worm their way into your organization. And that's what we're trying to avoid at all costs, because, particularly if it's a case of credentials that have been compromised, that's a real problem.
Yeah. The follow-up question that I have is, what do you think the most disastrous consequences of suffering a cyber attack? I've seen a lot, like I mentioned, solar wind. There are a lot of attacks which have happened here in India as well. There are a lot of data breaches attacks which have happened so far in the industry. There are a lot of people who come out, their data got leaked, the system are down. But still, what are the disastrous consequences you think of suffering a cyber attack?
I think there are a range of things, of course. The end of your company is one of them. The end of your company can literally, that's the end of it, finished, right, as a result of a major attack. If we look at the Equifax attack, which I think was in 2015 or 16 or something now, 17, I think it was 2017. Very senior people lost their job. Even if they were not responsible for it, they lost their jobs. So that's the other thing: loss of job, loss of income. But these are quite, the loss of the company is the real issue, right? That's a real problem. But there are other things as well. I mean, if you think about it, if with some of the breaches that we've seen, people's credit ratings have gone down the drain as a result. Identities have been lost. They've had to recreate their identities, and they're still small potatoes in comparison to actual real physical harm being done to individuals. That's the worst case that can happen as a result of a breach, as well as all those other things that we've talked about. I think, loss of an organization or loss of a lot of money is one thing, and loss of a reputation, but to lose a human life as a result, I think, is probably the most catastrophic thing.
Yeah, you correctly pointed out these things. In India, we recently suffered a cyber attack, which is on one of the power grid, which is it's still not, there are a lot of data is not yet came out, but it thinks like it's a state-sponsored cyber attack.
Yes.
So I just wanted to know. And I know that this particular session is majorly focused on awareness, but I just wanted to go in a little bit of a different direction. What do you see, and what do you see from this particular perspective, like these attacks which are state-sponsored, and these are not only on a government organization, but they sometimes are being done on the organization, like bigger organizations, because if the bigger organization or enterprise loses a lot of things, then the government is also losing, because their employment, like you mentioned, income and everything is going to go. So what do you think the future, in future, are we going to see more state-sponsored attacks, and what do you see it in future?
I think we will. I see it as modern warfare, really, to be honest. And you have to think, as a CISO, you have to think about what's hackable. How could they get into my organization? Well, it might be through a refrigerator that's internet connected. That could be the way in, the back door in, right? Or one I found recently on a client organization's network was a heating, ventilation and air conditioning system, totally unsecure. So, and let's be serious, state-sponsored attacks, the attackers have all of the tools that and compute power that they need to do this. They will just keep finding the way in. They'll keep looking into it. If they really want to get into that company, or they want to get into that company to use that company to get somewhere else, they will. So I see this really seriously as being modern warfare, and I think we will see much more of it. I think the Microsoft hack is, we should be looking out for that, because there's also this morning's press, there was more to say about that. There seems to be a follow-on or flow-on effect from that. So, you know, and in Australia, we've seen what looked like it could have been a state-sponsored intrusion into one of our large university network systems, which may have been about, in fact, watching the citizens of a particular country that's studying in Australia. So that's the sort of stuff that I think we have to be really concerned about, because that's really pervasive and intrusive. And if they're sitting in a system like that, who knows how long they might be deep inside a system before you know it. And you talk about the power grid. Let's remember Stuxnet, that was 2015. Let's talk about Stuxnet. There you go. I have an electricity background. That's where I came from. I was a CIO in the electricity businesses before I became a CISO. And I was one of the first in Australia to be responsible for both real-time and near real-time systems, as well as business IT. So I've seen operational control systems and SCADA systems, and what can happen when it goes wrong, like Stuxnet, right?
Yeah, yeah. And that's a really good point. The other part is, I think there's one more point I just wanted to highlight, that you mentioned that they hack one organization and then go for a next organization based on the data that you have. So
Correct.
Just want to share with the audience that we have received a lot of breaches information from multiple companies who reach out to us for an incident response, that what they should do once their data got breached. And majority of the cases, what we have found out when we investigated is that if their data is being compromised, like on a one website. So let's say I can tell you one story. There's a website called 000webhouse.com which got hacked, and one of the largest as a food delivery startup in India, his developer made an account on GitHub using the same credential that he was using on 000webhouse.com. And when this 000webhouse.com got hacked, and they have a password in a clear text format, they actually logged into that GitHub account, and then the next company got hacked. Now in this company, they again have thousands of millions of email ID and password they can utilize for other company, and that's how this chain goes on. And
exactly,
believe me, it's disastrous for the companies, because there are a lot of law enforcement agency comes to them. Not only this, the data get lost, and the kind of data that this goes is tremendously used, like PIA information, bank account details. In India, we have Aadhaar. So in US, you generally have a social security numbers. Everyone has an independent identity. So that's the kind of things which are happening. So it's very important to make sure that you have a two-step verification enabled, you're using from authorized systems, and etc. etc. So now the next question is I'm going to ask you.
Hang on. Yeah. Let's go. I haven't finished there yet. And the other thing that people have to be aware of, if they're doing that, you know, hacking this company, compromising it, getting information, getting into the next company, and so on, very, very difficult, no matter how well trained law enforcement is, to actually find the perpetrator, because they've moved on to somewhere else. And it's like going down the proverbial rabbit hole, right? And it's a warren underneath. So that's the other thing to think about. That's that's really insidious and scary stuff.
So there's a follow-up question in that as well. What is the way? So we're talking about people, and this particular things are generated via emails and etc. etc. Hackers do not go for majority of the vulnerability, generally go for the people. So what are the steps that you suggest for the people to have a strong mechanism to make sure that these things does not happen? And also, there are a lot of audience who like I said, who work in a corporate in India, abroad, or anywhere else who is watching this particular webinar. What do you suggest them from an security standpoint, that what they should implement, which makes sure that this kind of data breach does not happen?
You hope. No matter what you do, no matter what put in place, no matter how sophisticated your tools are, you have to recognize that it could happen to you. You know, the thing is, we've lived in the environment of it's going to happen to somebody else, not me. Well, forget it. If it could happen to you, and you have to be prepared for that, to have, as you said before, Pavan, really good incident response, fast incident response in place, just in case that does happen. So that's one thing, to be aware that those breaches could happen, and they could happen to you. If we go back to your first part of the question about the people, you have to make your people suspicious, right? People generally, particularly in some professions where they're those caring type professions, people are taught to be, and service industry, people are taught to be thoughtful, to be kind, to be helpful. Service desk operatives are a classic example there. They're taught to listen to the client and be helpful to the client. You actually want them to also be suspicious.
Mhm.
Is that person really who they say they are? Is that really Pavan from Kratikal? I'm not sure whether it is or not. So, okay, I'm going to call you back, hang up, and ring Pavan on not the number that the person on the phone gave you, but his real phone number, right? So you have to inbreed that little bit of suspicion in people, so as they don't take it for granted that the receptionist doesn't see two guys coming in with a very well-known organisation's brand on their polo shirt and say, "Hi, I'm here from whatever to collect two servers that I believe need to go for maintenance."
Mhm.
It's happened. It happened about 10 years ago at the Australian Taxation Office.
Mhm.
So yes, it did. But that person, there were two people actually on the front desk, on the reception desk, had been trained to be helpful, and they saw that name on the polo shirt of that outsourcing organisation and just assumed they were fine. So and just because somebody walks in with a lanyard and an ID card on it, make that person turn it around so you can see whether it really is them or not. There are all sorts of little things you can do, but it's really about building in a little bit of that suspicion into people.
Great. There's one more thing, and this is from our own side, that because of this WHF, which is work from home culture, there are a lot of things. The countries which used to have a proper systems and setups and etc. The lot of people have moved out to a work from home culture. Means they're doing their work from their homes instead of their corporate. Yeah. So the one thing is, there are companies which was ready for a work from home kind of environment. They have a proper controls, but majority of the organizations have a proper, I'll say, enterprise grade security within their premises. So what is your view on work from home when it comes to security? And the cloud adoption is actually getting increased. So people are actually doing a lot of things via cloud. There are a lot of VPN they're using, a lot of data transfer is being happening. Or what's your thought? How much cyber threat or how this particular system will affect our threat landscape?
I think the first thing that we have to consider is that this working from home. I think the pandemic has changed the way we work probably forever.
Mhm.
I have been working from home since the 17th of March last year, and I have been into my office 3 times since then. So that gives you the indication, right? We also have the ability to video conference with people, and I spend a whole lot of my day on Zoom with my team, who quite honestly are all across this country anyway. So for me, I've always worked with my team from anywhere, essentially, because they're elsewhere, right? But I think what happened with the pandemic is it meant that we did all go home. There are a couple of things with that. From the corporate side of it, a lot of organisations found it very difficult to suddenly let go, because they had this mentality that you had to be sitting on your seat we call it here bums on seats.
Mhm.
You had to have your bum sitting on your seat from 8 o'clock in the morning to whatever time, or 9 till 5, or 10 till 6, whatever it might be, but you had to be there. And because there was this belief that people wouldn't be productive if they weren't in the office doing that. And what was discovered fairly quickly was people working from home in Australia ended up by being mainly more productive. They were taking less comfort breaks, and they were actually taking far less sick leave. So, and there was also, of course, parents were able to balance parental obligation as well. So there had been a really big change. But we also then had to change the thinking of the individuals working from home in relation to security, right? Simple things like your laptop is your laptop for work. It is not the laptop of everybody in the house. So it's not for everybody in the house to be able to use it and play all kinds of, Fortnite and goodness knows what other game on it. So that was one thing. And in fact, even as late as today, somebody that in an organisation that I work with, we found that there was this strange password on it, and on a particular app. And it turned out it was one of his kids. So we had to have a little chat with him and say, this is not for your kid to be using, right? Otherwise, you will have to come back into the office. You might be there by yourself, but you'll be back in the office. So it's about changing individuals' mindsets. But then I had a woman also ring me and say, look, Jo, I'm really worried about, I've had to print out paper with, documents on it. Now I'm really worried about what I do with the document now I've finished with it. So she said to me, can I tell you what I've done? And I said, sure, okay. She said, I tore it all up and I put it in my sink of water and I got it all mushy and I squished it into a brick and I've dried it out. I'm going to put it in the fire. Now that I thought was a little extreme, but at least it showed me that she was thinking about security and securing that document. So quite honestly, that's one of the things we've had to do, is to change people's mindsets in relation to security, about how they think about security when they're working at home. Of course, you're right, we do have to consider the other elements as well. We have to really protect the corporate data. It's really no longer about protecting the perimeter. That used to be old school thinking. When I first became a CISO, we had to, it was always about the perimeter. Well, our perimeter has changed considerably, not just because of the pandemic, but because we also now have vendors who come into our environment. We have business partners who come into our environment. We share information with government. We share information with other organisations. So all of that has changed the perimeter, and the perimeter has become like Swiss cheese, essentially. So what we have to do is we have to protect the data, and that is, that's like the keys to the kingdom. So you actually have to look at how you protect your data in the best way that you can, so as it can still be accessed from people everywhere, but that it is properly secured. I think also the other thing about the pandemic is it's made sure that it has encouraged, I think, the use of cloud and managed services as well. So, that makes it much easier to manage as well if you're dealing with people who are all over the place accessing through, because as you need more capacity, you can dial it up or dial it down if you're in that environment as well. But it's still about using the best security tools that you can afford, given that, and they have to be commensurate with what you're protecting, right?
Correct. So I think you touch based on very important aspects of how this particular work from home culture is gonna be from a security standpoint. But what do you suggest? Like one is this one thing that you mentioned on when we're talking is called business partners, the vendors. So I know there are a lot of companies which got hacked because of the vendors. For example, let's say you talk about the SolarWinds. Wherever they have a SolarWinds, every other organization was almost got hacked, and there are a lot of things that has been done. So what's your view on how the organizations, or how should organizations handle third-party vendors in regards to cybersecurity? Because they are a very, very key element in every organization's growth.
Good supplier management. That's the key. And with good supply management, you need to make sure that they sign up to your policies. If they sign up to your information security policies and they are going to comply with them, if they don't, it's goodbye vendor, right? The other thing too is about ensuring that no generic accounts for vendors. They have to have named accounts. So, and those named accounts will have a time limit on them. So if you're coming in, Pavan, to do a piece of work for me and you're going to be there a week, you'll be timed out after a week. So I think that's the other thing to be really aware of, is that you need to ensure you know who is in your system, what they're doing in your system, and when they're going to be there. And you apply the principle of least privilege. They only have the access they need to do the job that you are employing them to do. So I think there's some of the really important things. You also tie some of this also to incentives, perhaps with the vendor as well, and they're the most important things, I think. And you have to monitor them. You need to monitor them. You need to have regular conversations with them, even if it's a long-term trusted vendor. You still need to be having those regular conversations with them and reminding them of their responsibilities in relation to you and your data, right? Because it's yours, it's sovereign to you.
Correct. So this is one from the people who are coming into your organization. But talk us about the product. So let's say you have a third-party vendor products which is coming into the system. There are some API integration which is that your data is going outside, or you are using. For example, I'm just giving an example, like HR system. So you're using a third-party HR system, or let's say CRM, or any other tool. So what are the things that people can do to make sure that they are not leaking your data? You are putting everything, like best effort to make sure day and night that your data is not getting leaked. But because of some third party has your data or has access to your data, or the critical information which is being stored on a third party website or a vendor's websites or a products or any other solution that they have, how you wanted to make sure that these guys has a sense of security and they will protect my data. So what are the things when you onboard these kind of vendors, how you go about being a CISO of an organization?
I work with my procurement team to tie them down to a contract, and that contract will state what they can and can't do, what is expected of them. So I think it's really important to make sure you have strong heads of agreement that procurement and legal have worked on to get you what you need in terms of security. You also need to make sure that you have performance reviews written into it and service level agreements. Of course, you need to understand the service levels around that particular product. The other thing too is, if you are implementing a new tool like that, you also need to make sure that you have roles-based access, so as you have a level of control. And again, that's about only allowing people, regardless of whether they're vendors or not, only allow them the access that they need to be able to do their job. And if you are going to store this stuff in a third-party site, you need to make sure that you know where that site is. You need to make sure that you understand where all the workloads are going. You need to know where it's backed up to. All of that's really important. For instance, in Australia, if I'm in the healthcare sector, for instance, all workloads must remain onshore in Australia, government regulation. Okay. So I need to know that you might be, yes, you have 2 data centers here and you're going to replicate between one, but I don't want to find out that at the end of every week you ship a copy of my database to the Netherlands or to Bangalore. Or to Colombo. I don't want to know that, right? All workloads must be onshore. So again, you tie that down contractually to ensure that that's the case. You need to make sure that the vendors you're working with are reputable. Make sure that you go through a really rigorous procurement process, and that you do reference checks as well with other clients of theirs too. So you do everything that you possibly can to make sure that you are making the best choice. And the best choice is not always the most expensive choice either, I'll just say. So it really is about making sure and to make sure it's fit for purpose in your organization.
Mm-hmm.
And if, HR is the classic example. I've just been through this with a client where they're looking at a new HR system. And one of the interesting things about that was there was one of the vendors said, "Oh, well, no, we don't have all of our workloads currently in Australia, but if we were successful with you, we would." And I said, "Well, how long is that going to take you?" "Well, we'd have to leave you in Singapore for 6 months and then we'd make." It's like, no, sorry, that's not the answer that I need. So, you have to determine whether that's if you need to keep all of your workloads in India, you need to make sure that that's contractually nailed down.
Great. So I think that's I think the way Joe summarizes that one is contracts is very important with the vendors, and you should have a rigorous, I'd say, assessment kind of thing. You build a checklist that where the data reside, what kind of controls that they have, the policies, and you make sure that they are actually going to your own policy. They are adapting your own information security policy, and they're enforcing them. It's not like they just
Yes.
said that they have applied them, but they are also enforcing them in their organizations. Great. So
there's one more thing, Pavan, and that's to make sure in the contract you have the right to audit. And that means that you actually have the right to perform vulnerability assessment on them. That's the other thing. So always make sure that you have the right to audit.
I think that's a interesting point. So that you can get to know what exactly their application look like, what kind of data they are leaking, and etc. etc. Now, so we are open to questions. I'll still keep talking to Joe. You can put up your questions in the chat box, and I'll take those questions with the Joe, and Joe will be happy to answer. So if you have any questions, do put it into the chat box. We'll take one by one. So till the time we will I have questions. I just wanted to ask you one more thing, and this is going to be the last questions. So how can organizations ensure the safety of their employee in the cyber world? That is one of the key outcomes that we are looking at, but this is the last thing. So I'm just asking from an architectural perspective, what if being a people manager, I'm just thinking of like loud, you have been assigned to make sure that that you have to build a program by which you make sure that entire security awareness or the vulnerability which being caused because of the people should be eliminated. So what you will structure it and how you will structure it? That's what my question is.
Well, that's a really easy question to finish with, Pavan. Thank you for that. I think that, somebody just said you need strong non-disclosure clauses.
Yes.
That goes without saying. Confidentiality is tops, absolutely. And legal should tell you that straight up. And if they don't, sack your lawyer. That's what I say. So back to your question, how do you structure it if you want to keep people safe online, essentially is what we're talking about here. I still go back to where we started, really. It's about communicating with them. It's about making them understand their rights, roles, and responsibilities, right, in relation to the information that they're handling, that they're creating, that they're storing, transmitting, all of that, right? They have to consider the life cycle of that as well. So, and consider the criticality and sensitivity. So again, it's about making people, communicating with them, making them aware. You really have to make them aware of the pitfalls for them. So all of that is I guess that's an easy place to start, is awareness, communication and awareness it comes back to. I think we've got a couple of questions there, haven't we?
Yeah. So there's one more question from Abhishek. I came across to a news that a person was working for 2 companies simultaneously, both being work from home. When asked him about the workload, he said he hired a freelancer to maintain the workload. So if it is bad, then how bad it is, and what the most might be the consequences, and why does such companies lessen validating their employees? That's a very good question.
That employee would no longer be my employee when I found that out. That would be the very simple answer to that. And again, you need to look at the employment contract that you have that with that employee, because I'm sure you could be waving them goodbye very easily. I mean, that's appalling. In fact, that is a lack of trust. I mean, there's a lack of confidence there, because the information that they're using, he's just allowed somebody else into your systems essentially without any of the checks that should be in place. So yes, as far as I'm concerned, that person is gone, and you need to look at employment contracts to make sure that there is an addendum that does not allow that kind of subcontracting out of work. And I'm sure if you look at whatever the contract is you have with an employer, I'd be very surprised if there was a loophole big enough to allow that to happen. So yes, that's horrific.
Yeah. So there's one more question that I came across from Mr. Taylor's. Hi, Joe. Thank you for interesting discussion. Do you have any thoughts on BEC scams and how organization can protect against third-party compromises? It is something we are seeing more and more on, and of course, it's a customer or a partner email is compromised. It is really difficult for our employees to spot, and it's a actual real case scenario that we see on a daily basis. So, Joe.
Yes, look, I think that's a really good question. Thank you very much for that question. And you're right, it is really difficult. However, create that air of suspicion with your employees, and if they are actually not expecting an email, because oftentimes they do come out of the blue. If you are not expecting an email, or if that individual in the organization is seen as a soft target, and so it's been sent to them, and they would not normally receive those kind of emails, then of course it should be reported. So again, it's about education, right? You've got to educate them, have the right tools in place for them to be able to report it, have the right incident and reporting management process in place as well. So it goes back to that. But you're right, they can be really insidious because they can look really good. So it's just about thinking. I mean, I saw one not that long ago, and the only thing that gave it away was I actually knew the company that it looked like it was coming from, but I knew there was no individual by that name at that organisation. So the other thing is, if you're not sure, again, contact the organisation and say, do you have a Pavan working for you? Because I've just got this email. So again, it's about creating that little bit of sense of suspicion. There was a scam going on here that looked like it was coming from one of our electricity providers. And so people who suddenly were getting these things that said, well, hang on, I don't get electricity, that's not my provider. So that was easy, right? But if you are expecting it to come from, XXX electricity, and you get this thing in your mailbox that's saying they're about to cut you if you don't do this, and it can be, pay this invoice immediately, and you're going, but I don't think. And I've seen people actually almost fall for that sort of scam in business. So we do need to be really careful with that stuff. And again, education, and make them suspicious.
Great. I think so. I just wanted to add some more things, because we have around 500K plus employees. We are training them on a security awareness. There is a few things that should be considered. One is, whenever you are onboarding a third party or a partner, or you have someone, make them educated about DMARC, so that once they have a proper DMARC control, the people will not be able to send up phishing emails right from their mailboxes. The other part is, if the email's user is compromised. So what we have here in Kratikal is, there's a button called tab, threat alert button, which also gives you an idea from where generally this user used to send an email. So let's say if it's sending from Australia and then now suddenly started sending from Pakistan or Nigeria, you will be able to identify. The third is, like Joe mentioned, and it's very, very important. Awareness, train. So what you need to do is, you need to train your employee to these situations. Like, you simulate these kind of attacks into your organization and see how many people are responding. So this is what we generally do with the help of our tool called ThreatCop, where what we have seen so far is, in the first simulation or BEC attack that we did so far for organization, we've seen around 30 to 40% kind of click rate on the phishing pages that we have sent. And within a year of time, we are able to reduce it to 4.2% only. So basically, you're reducing that risk by quantifying on a multiple level. So that's something that I just wanted to add from my own experience. So that's a very, very nice question.
And that's a very good point about, I call it impossible travel, right? And that's, literally you see somebody and they're sending you an email from their desk, from Adelaide, and it's clearly the right person because that's where they are. And then the next thing you get one from them from New Zealand, and then the next thing you get one from Accra in Ghana, and you go, no, hang on, that's not right. They can't possibly have gotten to Ghana by now. So that's a really good point, Pavan, because that's something that you need to be really aware of, is that component of impossible travel, absolutely.
Great. And thank you so much, Joe, for your time. I think with the time on your 2:30, it's 3 p.m. in India. So thank you so much. We really enjoyed your conversation. And we look forward for getting more and more information and experience from your side. So thank you, audience. Thank you so much. We had Joe with us. She is a Chief Security Officer at Silver Chain Group. She is a member of ISACA, and she also sits on an advisory board. She has a huge experience. She already mentioned, and the way we talk about the entire conversation, I'm fortunate to have you on this webinar. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you, Pavan. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.